no one's going to discredit that loss. Everybody knows now Ilya is one of the best weights in the world now, and there's no way it's a win-win now for both those guys. So I think that's why it makes sense to have this fight maybe potentially next year instead of doing it right away before Ilya had any ranked wins in the lightweight division.
Welcome back, everyone. It's the MMA Outsiders, episode 123. My name is Zain Bando. He is Anthony Balester to my right, and thank you so much for joining us. Happy August, which means we're getting closer and closer to the start of what I like to call, at least for this show, crossover season, because during the summer months, you basically have baseball and you have fights, but in just a couple weeks, we're going to have some professional football and college football for real this time. The first official week of the NFL preseason is this weekend, which means the full-on MMA calendar is starting to die down, and it means we're getting closer and closer to the fall, and we're also getting closer and closer to the weather getting a little bit colder. But for now, we should enjoy these warm weeks while we can. And my name is Zain Bando. He's Anthony Balester. This is episode 123, and we don't have a huge show this week, but we have a pretty noteworthy show considering that we have more news items than anything. Anthony, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. I know it's been a really hot summer, so I'm actually looking forward to the fall coming. It's not too hot, not too cold, and I love football season. We just got the Hall of Fame game. Now all 32 teams will be in action this weekend. We got some exciting fights coming up as well over a couple weeks, so it's a very exciting time.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it, and I know you are too, as this fall schedule is starting to take shape. We're going to talk more about the fall schedule as we get deeper and deeper into the show, but let's take care of a few quick reminders before we get started for today. Please be sure to like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. It's very, very important. Only takes about 30 seconds or so to do so. You can go to youtube.com/ETB Network as the climb to 1,000 subscribers continues. Again, it would be very, very much appreciated if you guys subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that way you don't miss a single episode of this show, my show, Bando's Breakdowns, the football forecast. When it officially comes back around, we have our conference previews coming up in a couple weeks before we get into the season itself, and then of course Forever Power 5 and so much more. So stay tuned for all the content there. Then of course, again, I'm Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer for MMA Knockout. He's Anthony Balester. He's an ETB Sports podcaster. And Anthony, before we get going, do you have any exciting projects coming up on the ETB front that you'd like to share with the viewers before we get started?
Yeah, of course. We're getting ready to start the first episode back for the 2025 season for Forever Power 5. We got a lot of things to break down for that. We've been building up the rundowns. Looks like right now we're expected to come back August 20th. And then the show would be premiering August 22nd. And we got a lot of things to talk about. I mean, you got Bill Belichick, you got Deion Sanders, and all these great figures in college football. So I can't wait to preview and get onto it.
For sure. And speaking of that show and so much more, you can listen to the MMA Outsiders and Forever Power 5 and every other show on the network, wherever your podcast, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so much more. That's going to take care of the housekeeping thing. So let's get into the show. Let's take a brief run through into what took place this past weekend. The first UFC Apex event since late May is in the books, and we had he had what was thought to be a flyweight banger turn one-sided. Tatsuro Taira gets back into the win column after losing his first ever fight in the UFC and MMA. And with Brandon Royval, he comes back and beats the always exciting finisher, Hyun Sung Park, and he does it easily, getting a face crank submission in the second round. Very, very, very dominant performance from Taira in the Battle of Japan versus Korea. And I think it goes to show that flyweight has a legitimate contender on their hands, and his performance against Brandon Royval was no fluke. What did you think? What did you think of the fight overall?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised at all. I thought it was a little too much too soon for Sung Park, and I think the UFC obviously didn't want to do this, but their hands were tied. They had to come up with a new main event. Since the guy he was supposed to fight wasn't able to fight, so they had to make some adjustments. He was supposed to fight Amir Abazi, which would have been a banger, but Sung Park, a young fighter who's got tremendous potential, I think he was a couple fights away, maybe a year away from fighting someone at this high tier and high level. And
I think so too, man.
With Taira, man. It goes to show you what levels that he is, and he's one of the best fighters. Not just one of the best young fighters, but just one of the best fighters overall in the UFC. His only loss was that very close split decision loss to a guy like Brandon Royval, who pretty much, if you beat Brandon Royval, your next fight's fighting in a championship fight. So I think Tatsuro Taira showed that he's not that far away, and I really think he's going to be fighting a title shot sometime in 2026, and rightfully so.
Yeah, so speaking of title shots, et cetera, Tapology, at the time that we're recording this, came up with a brand new, very, very well run and just very, very ramped up rankings for every single UFC division. I'm not sure if you checked this out yet. I'm over in the flyweight section. Tatsuro Taira, after his win against Park here, is now number 6 in the division. Only trailing Steve Erceg, Joshua Van, Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, as we just alluded to, and of course the champion Alexandre Pantoja. Do you think, given that this is sort of considered now a global ranking that's outside of the UFC's jurisdiction, do you think Tapology he got this one right with putting Taira at number 6? And do you think that potentially with 1 or 2 more wins, he'll be fighting for a championship? Because I think if anything, I think one of the fights we're going to talk about this weekend could go a long way in potentially determining that, especially if Taira ends up being a backup fighter in about a year or so. And also, as you probably know, just given the calendar and where we're at, Taira took no damage, so I could easily see him fighting in either November or December. What do you think?
Yeah, I can see maybe him potentially fighting Amir Abazi, them rescheduling that, or maybe him fighting a guy like a Brandon Moreno or something like that. He's got to challenge one of these top guys. I don't think they'll give him a rematch with Brandon Royval. They probably want to get a fresh face. But I do think he's probably 1 to 2 fights away from fighting for the title shot. Obviously, Joshua Van is next up. He should be the number 1 contender after beating Brandon Royval. So after that fight, Tatsuro Taira, if he adds in a top 5 win, he's probably the next guy up. And I think when you said those rankings, I think you said Steve Erceg was 1 spot ahead of him. I'd make the argument that Tatsuro Taira should be ahead of a guy like Steve Erceg,
who
hasn't looked that good in a couple of his fights. I know he fought some of the top competition, but Tatsuro Taira's got 1 loss, and it was a split decision loss to a guy a lot of people thinking Royval, who's either the number 1 or number 2 contender in the world. So Tatsuro Taira is definitely one of the 5 best flyweights in the world. And I do think he fights 1 more time at the end of this year, and then he's probably next up for the title shot in 2026, possibly.
Yeah, and speaking of, I never got a chance to tell you where Amir Albazi falls into this. Amir Albazi is number 8. Is that is that surprising to you, or do you think that that's the correct placement?
I think that's about right. I think somewhere just outside the top 5, between 6 and 8 makes sense. I know he does got that win over Kai Kara-France, but I think that was a bad decision when I think Kai Kara-France won that fight, and I think Kai Kara-France is the better fighter. So I think that's so just too, about right for him.
I think so too. So in a nutshell, just to run through it here. And speaking of Kai Kara-France is 1 spot below Amir Albazi at number 9. Do you believe that that's potentially correct?
I mean, since he does got that win over, it makes sense. I mean, he's, even if you don't agree with it, the guy got the win. He should be ranked ahead of him. But in my opinion, I would put Kai Kara-France above a guy like Abazi. And honestly, I'd put all those guys above a guy like Steve Erceg. I think Steve Erceg should be around that 7 or 8 mark, and all those other guys should be a spot ahead.
Well, listen, and just to close it out, we're going to do the top 10. I might as well give you the last guy. Tapology has the number 10 ranked flyweight Alex Perez. Do you agree, or do you potentially disagree with that? Do you believe that Perez should still be in a discussion, considering he's been kind of hovering around there for the last year to 2 years or so now?
Yeah, I think 10 is the perfect spot. He's kind of like a gatekeeper, I think, in that flyweight division for the top 10. He beats most of these guys that are ranked below than him, but he can't really compete with the top guys. So I think he's a perfect guy to round out that top 10.
Well, and let's talk about some other UFC Fight Night reactions. We had a few other interesting fights in the card, including the Mateus Rebecca Chris Duncan fight, which a lot of people are calling a potential fight of the year. I think it was an absolute travesty that this fight had to take place in the Apex with how hard these guys fought. What do you think? What do you think now, Anthony? That's now 3 wins in a row for Chris Duncan, and all 3 times he was the betting underdog. Um, has he won you over? Because he certainly won me over. That's for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And what two things the UFC likes is guys that can win and guys that have exciting fights. And this guy gives you both. And the fact that he can provide both and be someone that's going to put fans in the seats, he's a guy that we could be seeing fighting in a ranked matchup in his next fight. And we got to give, Rebecca a shout out too. I mean, the guy was fighting, for his life. I mean, you saw the blood, the bruises all over his face, and the guy just kept coming and did not quit. So I'm glad that got fighting tonight. Both guys let their hearts out on the line. I bet both those guys had to go to the ER after. But it goes to show you when you get two guys who are willing to fight to the death and leave it all in the octagon, you get an exciting fight like that. And there really was no losers in that one. Both those fighters gave the fans exactly what they wanted. And the same thing happened with the fight before with Ribovic and Brenner. I thought that fight went similar. Both guys were brawling it out, and both fights could have went either way. I think the guys who won the fights deserved to win it. But yeah, I've definitely been won over by Duncan.
Yeah. So speaking of, you were talking about it. So yeah, the 2 performance bonuses went to all 4 guys in those 2 fights, back to back respectively. So I would agree with you that it's very, very well deserved. Someone who I thought potentially got snubbed of a performance bonus is Neil Magny, who picked up a win against Lesky dos Santos. I think he was a pretty decent underdog, and no one really gave him a chance. Just considering that he's kind of on the older side now and has been in one of these kind of gatekeeper welterweights that keeps getting put up against these young prospects. And he went out and he destroyed Dos Santos. What did you think of Magny's performance? Do you think that this is one of those wins that potentially gets him back into the upper echelon of that division where he could hover around the top 15, top 10 range for the next few years before he retires? What do you think?
Yeah, I was very impressed by Neil Magny. I know you said a lot of people didn't believe in him, but me and you, Zan, did. Me
Yeah,
and you
we sure
both
did.
picked him to win this. And I know there was a lot of experts out there who really wasn't giving him a chance. And I like Neil Magny. Obviously, he loses to a lot of these ranked guys. But when he's going up against a guy who's a little on the older side, a guy who's not in the top 15, he usually fares pretty well. I know he almost had that loss to Mike Malott, but he was able to show veteran toughness and win that fight at the end. And I just think that when he's fighting these guys, like you said, he's a great gatekeeper where if he's fighting these guys who are not ranked, he's got a very good shot to win. And I was really surprised of how much of an underdog he was. And I'm glad me and you were on the correct side of that. And honestly, me and you both had a great week with picks.
We
I
sure
went
did.
10-2. I think you went 8-4. And this was a fight card, Zan, that I thought was really hard to predict. And me and you fared pretty well this week.
You sure did. And another fight that we both heard pretty well in was Andre Puliev's comeback winning against Nick Klein. Did you see this comeback coming? Because I didn't, man.
Yeah, it didn't look too good. I was getting a little nervous at the beginning of the fight. But Puliev, I know he's a decent, good striker. I know at some point he was going to land something big, and he was able to get that win at the end. And I was very impressed. And I think, given his age, I think he's only getting better. And I like to see. I'm encouraged to see what his future holds because I think he's the guy that with this win and the motivation, hype, and momentum he's going to get, I think he could build on this and potentially rise up and maybe go on a decent win streak.
So given how much crap this card got at the beginning of last week and considering how much it delivered by the end of it, what would you give this grade overall? I'm going to go a little more generous and say an 8.2 out of 10. I think that the final 3 fights on the card really put it over the edge for me as one of those fight night cards where I was like, wow, this is a huge bounce back from the very, very lackluster UFC Vegas 107, which was supposed to feature Blanchfield versus Barber. Of course, it didn't happen. What would you give it for your ranking overall?
Yeah, I'm not that far behind. I give it around a 7.8. Obviously, we didn't have the tremendous great ranked fights or ranked fighters on this card, but it was a card that if you didn't worry about the rankings or worry about the names and just focus on the fights, it was a very, very exciting fight card. We got to see a lot of finishes, a lot of TKOs, a lot of submissions, and we got to see a lot of guys brawling it out. And then also it finished with the submission win. And I got to see a tremendous performance by one of the best young stars in Tattoo, Taira. So I give it a 7.8. I think it was a better fight night that definitely over-delivered when we first come into this. A lot of people weren't expecting anything from the fight card.
For sure. But of course, the appetizer that preceded it was the first weekend. The PFL finals. We had the PFL welterweight and PFL featherweight finals on display. We had Thad Gene winning his fight, and of course we had of winning his respective fight. And the one that I think really impressed me was Thad Gene, because Thad Gene was a huge underdog going into this tournament. No one really gave him a fair shake considering who he had to beat to get to the finals, and he was fighting a long-time veteran in Logan Sterling. And even though it was a back and forth fight, I think Gene really showed that he deserves to be in the PFL, and this is a guy that I think the PFL could build around for future seasons, because he was someone that came out of nowhere about a year ago, and now pretty much everything in his toolbox has come to form. And him beating a guy at Logan Sterling's caliber, a guy who's been in championship situations before, was a very impressive win. And I'm sorry, you just can't count to anybody who's a protege at Khabib. So congrats to Movlid. He looked very good.
Yeah, I was impressed by both these guys, and like you said, Dad Gene started off this tournament as an underdog, and now he's going to finish as the top dog in the division. I mean, a guy who no one probably would have predicted to win. Now, if he's in the PFL tournament again next year, will definitely easily be the odds-on favorite. And I don't see a lot of people in the PFL in the welterweight class being able to contend with him. I mean, the guy's got good grappling, he's got tremendous strikes, tremendous kicks. I mean, the guy pretty much could do it all. He's one of the budding stars, and I'd like to see him continue to be in the PFL for another couple years, build up his resume, and then maybe someday we see him move up to a UFC or something like that. But right now, this guy, the sky's the limit for him. And like you said, with Movlid, having Khabib at his corner, coaching him throughout the fight, it looked like at moments he was going to lose the fight, and then ultimately he was able to show that veteran experience and get the submission win at the end. So it goes to show you how skilled he was, and I was very impressed by both these guys. And both these guys look like some of the best fighters in the PFL. And honestly, even though they did win the championship, so it is obvious they should be the favorite heading into the PFL 2026 tournament next year.
Yeah, I would agree. So I need to get your opinion on something, because parts of the MMA community began to talk about this. Apparently, Thad Gene is publicly called the 2024 champion in Usayev, and he wants to eventually fight him in a super fight of sorts next year. Is that a fight? You'd be interested in potentially watching?
Oh, of course. I would love to see the guy who won it last year against the guy who won it this year, champion versus champion, and really be able to decide, unanimously and undisputed who is the top welterweight champion in the PFL. So that would be a great super fight. Don't even put it in the tournament. Just make that one of the super fights at like a PFL Africa or one of these other cards that the PFL does. I would love to see that, definitely.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I bet you that most of the MMA community agrees with you as well. So I'm glad that we're on the same wavelength there. Were there any other fights on the card that stuck out before we shift our attention next week to the next portion of the finals, or were those the only two fights you were really interested in?
Yeah, those were the only two fights that really stuck out to me. Was there any fights that stood out to you, Zan, besides these?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I thought the card was a decent show. I think it could have been a little bit better in terms of star power or names. But if you were to ask me, let me actually see, because I have it. I was sure it was only a 9-fight card, which is a little bit surprising, and that's been a trend. And this year in the PFL that I've noticed is most of these cards are actually shorter than you might expect. Yeah, I mean, overall, I think it was just kind of a normal PFL card. It was nice to see Jordan Newman get back in the win column. He was supposed to fight in June. His opponent had to pull out due to visa issues, so it was exciting that they were able to rebook him. Yeah, and I think it's always exciting to watch Nathan Kelly fight. It's always exciting to watch Shields fight. So I actually thought the undercard was halfway decent, but for sure the fights that stole the show were the main and co-main event, no doubt. So overall, I thought it was a decent PFL show, and I think the next one, which is going to be coming up August 15th, is going to be good, and then of course the one on August 20th as well should be very interesting. But let's shift gears now, let's go back a couple of weeks to UFC Abu Dhabi. We had Ranier de Ridder upsetting Robert Whittaker in the main event there. Anthony, very quickly, your thoughts on that fight and just some of the other fights on the card as well?
Yeah, I thought, the fight was really, really close. I mean, this was a fight that was 50-50 and makes sense why it ended up being a split decision. I wouldn't have been mad if they gave it to Whittaker or, de Ridder. Both guys looked like they were going to win the fight. There was moments where Robert Whittaker looked like he was going to get the TKO win, and then moments where de Ridder looked like he was going to get a submission win. I know both guys were going at a high pace, so by the time we got to the fourth and fifth round, both guys were gassed out. I thought Ridder deserved to win due to the control time. I know even though there was times where he wasn't getting the takedowns, he still was controlling Robert Whittaker for most of the fight. So definitely was the fight of the night for me. Whittaker did show a solid takedown defense, but for de Ridder now that he's got this high-profile win, we know in the middleweight division, if you could beat a guy like Robert Whittaker, you're usually fighting for the title next. I mean, Dricus beat Whittaker. He was fighting for the title next. And now you see Hamzat fighting for the title next. So it looks like de Ridder's probably going to get the next title shot. I know we got Brohio fighting Imavov at the end of the year, but I think with this win now, RDR has supplanted both those guys now. And honestly, when you look at potential matchups, and I know we're going further ahead, but if Hamzat beats Dricus, think about the matchup between Hamzat and RDR. RDR is one of the best grapplers in the world, and he's not going to be a guy that Hamzat's just going to be able to throw around. He also throws really bad lethal kicks, and with his size being over 6'4", he's probably walking in that octagon at 210, 215 pounds. He's not going to be a guy that Hamzat's just going to be able to throw around. And I would just love to see that potential matchup between those guys. I really think if he gets past Dricus, this would be the toughest matchup stylistically. Not saying that RDR is better than Dricus, but I think the style that he fights with is the complete nightmare matchup for a guy like Hamzat, and I would just be very interested to see that. And then the other fight that obviously you had Pierre Yan beating Marcus McGee. I think that fight wasn't really close. I mean, Yan, like I said, heading into that fight, shows that there's level to this, and Marcus McGee, yeah, he's got the power shots, but Yan was able to be efficient and outstrike him and be the more accurate boxer. And he just goes to show you that McGee, as good as he is, he's just not at that level. And I think Yan has established himself as potentially the next title contender at 135. I mean, this guy has beaten Corey Sandhagen. He should have gotten the win over Sean O'Malley. And I think Umar Nurmagomedov, who's coming off a loss, needs another win. So I think I would like to see Peter Yan against Umar Nurmagomedov, or I just want to see Peter Yan get the next title shot against the winner of Merab and Corey Sandhagen. So that's what stood out to me.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I couldn't say it any better myself. I was very impressed with de Ridder. I'm going to be completely blunt and say I thought the Whittaker fight was going to be close. Did I think he could do that to Whittaker? No. So it just goes to show how much of a great signing the UFC made by picking him up from one championship, of course. But I think the part in which you're sweeping on is the fight I'm more excited to potentially see is if DDP gets past Hamzat and it's already earned. As much as you like the Hamzat fight, I think I'm more interested to see the DDP RDR fight, because to me, I feel like they're mirror images of one another. They're both finishers, and we've really never seen DDP off of his back. And I actually think that RDR could be the first guy to put DDP on his back, and it would be very interesting to see how DDP fares with the grappler of such caliber of RDR off of his back. It would be a very interesting fight in itself. I'd be fine with either fight. I just feel like RDR versus DDP is a better stylistic matchup, and I think it's a fight that more of the casual fans are interested in. But I could easily see RDR fighting Hamzat too in an international showcase somewhere like Abu Dhabi or like somewhere else. And I think either way, the middleweight division is in a very, very interesting position though overall. And of course, you can't forget we have the fight this weekend that we're going to talk about, and of course, on the same card as UFC 319 in a couple weeks, you got Michael Venom Page versus Jared Cannonier, which is just as important, if not more important, than any other contender fight in the division. So you never know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, whoever basically wins between DDP and Hamzat, that's going to be the fight to make with them and RDR. So if DDP can get past Hamzat, then I would definitely be more excited for the DDP versus RDR fight. And last thing I'll say is Gustav. getting the win over Krylov, exactly like I predicted. I said Krylov coming off that very vicious TKO win. He was going to be perceptible to getting TKO'd. I said he would lunge in and he would be perceptible to getting TKO'd, and Guskov was able to take advantage of it. And he looks like a tremendous rising contender in that division as well. And speaking of the middleweights, and don't forget, in Paris, we got that Kyle Bahayo fight against Invoyov. So, like you said, the middleweight division is stacked with these future contenders.
Yeah, a division is stacked with these future contenders for sure, and that will put a bow on UFC Abu Dhabi. Before we continue with the rest of the show, though, we're going to take a quick time out to get a very quick message from our friends over at Playback, and then we'll be back with the second half of the show to recap some more news and preview UFC and wrap it up. So in just a few minutes, we'll see you guys then. All right, just want to do a quick timeout in the middle of the show to remind you guys that the MMA Outsiders is presented by Playback, and I teased that there was something a little bit earlier in the show, but now without further ado, here we go. Presented by Playback, watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. You won't regret it. Thank you so much for checking out that message from our friends over to Playback. And now we're going to get into the second half of the show. We're going to talk about some more news and potentially a date that has been floated around and potentially confirmed by Khabib Nurmagomedov himself. Khabib was at a speaking engagement in New York City over the weekend, and it appears that UFC 322, which is supposed to be taking place in Madison Square Garden, will feature Islam Makhachev versus Jack Della Maddalena for Della Maddalena's UFC welterweight title. Assuming this fight happens, it's obviously a big one. It's been teased for a bit. The UFC is yet to officially confirm it, but given that it's coming from Khabib and given Khabib's close ties to Islam, I would argue that this is more than likely probably 90 to 95% accurate. I'm just excited to know that this fight is happening, considering that it's been teased for a bit, and I'm also excited to see how Islam fares in a new division after vacating his lightweight title earlier this year and trying to challenge himself in a different division to try to become a two-division champion before a potential super fight that looms with potentially Ilia Topuria if he can take care of some more business going into early next year. Overall, though, I'm excited for the fight. I just hope I just hope it over delivers, because I think a lot of people are almost skeptical of this fight, considering the track record that Islam has been on, and just considering that Della Maddalena kind of came out of nowhere within the last year or so, and then took care of business against Bilal Muhammad in kind of an underwhelming fight. A lot of people are saying that this may be a wash for Makhachev. I'm one of those people that doesn't think so. I think it'll be closer than people think. Do I think that JDM might still lose? That's also possible, but I just think, though, putting this fight on a major stage like Madison Square Garden, it's not the biggest fight the UFC could put for MSG, but to give MSG the consensus number one pound for pound fighter in the world, I don't think it's a really bad consolation prize, considering what fight more than likely should have headlined the Madison Square Garden card. But nonetheless, though, Anthony, what did you think of Khabib potentially teasing this? If you were to guess, when do you think the UFC is going to confirm it? And what is your early outlook on this fight? Is it'll more than likely be November 15th? I did some digging when writing a story on this, because it looks like the week before that, the Rangers have a home game at Madison Square Garden, meaning the New York Rangers hockey team, and the very next week they go to Columbus to play the Blue Jackets, which means that Madison Square Garden would be open for November 15th. And of course, the UFC can't do it November 22nd because they have a fight night card in Qatar. So I feel like November 15th is the only suitable option. But besides the date, which is going to be figured out in short order here within the next probably month or so, what are your early thoughts on this fight? Do you think it actually gets confirmed? And what did you think overall of Khabib's announcement and just kind of the way he threw that in there at random? We'll but some other topics that people probably least expected before the speaking engagement happened Saturday night in New York City.
Yeah, not surprised at all, Zain. Like you said, this is something we've been speculating for a while. We know once Belal Muhammad lost the title shot or lost the title against Jack Della Maddalena, Islam was going to move up. He would have probably moved up sooner had Belal not captured the title, since those guys are such good friends. And Islam has been talking about this move for a while. He really wants to fight and become one of these rare fighters who become a double champ status. The guy, is a tremendous fighter at, the 155 belt, but after a while, he wants to fight fresh faces. He's not a guy who likes to have rematches. He likes to, to accomplish new things. And going to 170, he gets a fresh new set of contenders. And with Jack getting the upset over his friend Belal, that just puts mad more incentive on Islam to get paid back for his boy in Belal. And now that since he hasn't fought since January, this just gives Islam more time to pack on that extra pounds of muscle. I know he was a really big 155 fighter. I mean, he was probably walking in the octagon at around 175, 180. So he probably doesn't have to put on much weight. But now when he fights at 170, he's probably going to be walking in that octagon at 190 pounds. So he's probably wanting to put on about 5 or so pounds of muscle over these last 6 or 7 months. So we're going to see a much bigger Islam. He gets better with each and every fight. And I think he's going to do what Belal Muhammad didn't do. Belal Muhammad didn't stick to his normal game plan. He seemed like he wanted to try to sit there and strike it out with Jack Della Maddalena. And I know Jack showed tremendous takedown defense, but it didn't seem like the normal Belal we've seen. And I think Islam's going to have a much better game plan. And I think he's going to win that fight pretty easily. I don't think it's going to be like what you said, Zain. I know a lot of people think it may be close, but I just think Islam is one of the best pound-for-pound fighters for a reason. And I just think stylistically, Jack's not the guy that's going to be able to beat him. I think he's going to go in there and make easy work for him. And with this fight potentially being in November, I think we could see an announcement around sometime in September. I know Dana White's going to probably want to have a month or two to sell this fight. Like you said, maybe they do some promotions with the Rangers in their arena for these fights. So I'm excited to see it. And I even though I think Islam will win it, it's definitely exciting to see, because when a guy moves up in a weight class, as skilled as they are, you don't know how they're going to fare against these bigger guys. And we've seen Islam, who's fought so many fighters, guys who were former featherweight. So he's fought a lot of guys who have been considered undersized. And now in the first time in his career, he's going to be the undersized guy going up against Jack. So that's one thing we're going to have to look out for. But, man, there's so many great potential fights for him in that division. Even if we don't ever get him in the Ilia Topuria fight, even if he beats Jack, we're going to potentially see Islam and Shavkat Rakhmonov. And that's a fight that really excites me, because that's a guy who could grapple and strike as well, and who had the size advantage as well. So, and then you got Sean Brady, who's the tremendous grappler as well. So there's so many guys in that division. The welterweight division is one of the best in the world. So I'm excited to see Islam against these new faces in the welterweight division.
Yeah, very well. And I mean, I think this is a fight, as we just alluded to, that's been teased for a while. And again, I'm excited to see Islam in a new weight class as well. But I think the question that people are beginning to ignore is, why do you think, in your opinion, and I'll give mine, well, why do you think, in your opinion, the UFC decided to go this direction instead of just making the Ilya Islam fight when it was already kind of hot on the iron, if you will, because that's a fight that I think people are still interested in. Obviously, Ilya just did the viral knockout over Charles Oliveira, and it's a fight that I think people would buzz about if the UFC ever chose to make it. But why do you think right now is the right time for the JDM fight to happen instead of the Ilya fight?
Yeah, I really don't think the UFC had a choice. I think Islam, if Belal lost the belt, he was going to move up. I mean, he's a guy who, like he said, what has he gained by fighting Ilya, who at that point of his career didn't have any, tremendous ranked wins in the lightweight division. Yeah, he beat Jilo Herbert, but he didn't beat any of those top contenders. And Islam is in a lose-lose scenario. It's just like when he beat Alexander Volkanovski. He beats a great fighter like Alexander Volkanovski, and instead of being credited for it and given the respect he deserves, all people do is discredit him, saying, oh, you don't got no lightweight wins. All you've done is beat featherweights. So by him beating Ilya before Ilya has beaten one of these guys, it's the same thing as beating Volk. It's like, okay, you beat a smaller guy than you should be. And then if he loses, it just looks bad on him because you lost to a guy who was a featherweight. Now, by having him move up to welterweight, maybe potentially getting that double champ status, defending that belt, while allowing Ilya to capture the lightweight belt and now being considered a true lightweight champion. I think that sets up for an even bigger super fight, because now you got two guys who are not only champions, but two guys that are double champions. And who knows, if they fight at 170, you could sell the storyline of Ilya trying to go for the first ever triple champ status, or you got Islam coming back to potentially have both belts simultaneously. And now if he does beat Ilya, no one's going to discredit that loss. Everybody knows now Ilya is one of the best weights in the world now, and there's no way it's a win-win now for both those guys. So I think that's why it makes sense to have this fight maybe potentially next year instead of doing it right away before Ilya had any ranked wins in the lightweight division.
Yeah, that's a bold take, but I could definitely see where you're coming from there. So you can say with confidence that you're way too early pick on Wednesday, August 6th, at the time that this is airing, that Islam Makhachev will beat JDM to become the new UFC welterweight champion, because that's what I have too.
Yeah, 100%. Unless if he gets injured before the fight and can't fight it, I think it's inevitable that the 2025 year ends with Islam as the 170 welterweight division champion.
Well, listen, and the other layer to this, which is kind of on the opposite side of things, if you will, Khabib teased another big fight, and it's the rematch, which is the biggest fight that the PFL can make at present. It's Dagestan versus Ireland Part 2. It is Paul Hughes versus Usman Nurmagomedov, and they can do that fight anywhere in the world, but allegedly it's supposed to be taking place in October in Abu Dhabi. The first fight was really, really close. A lot of people had it going either way. I actually thought at points that Paul Hughes was going to do enough to edge it, but Usman Nurmagomedov came out on top. I'm sorry. I hate to be the Debbie Downer here. I just don't think the second fight lives up to the billing that people say it's going to. And I actually think that Usman Nurmagomedov wins a very boring, wrestle-heavy decision, assuming the fight happens. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely agree. You know, Khabib is one of the best game planners in the world. He's going to give Usman Nurmagomedov a completely different game plan, and they're going to really change what they did in the first fight. Now they're going to respect Paul Hughes a lot more on the feet, and they're not going to give Paul Hughes now that chance to win this fight on the feet. Like you said, Usman Nurmagomedov is going to take it to the ground and absolutely dominate him, but there's really no other fights to make. I mean, this is really the only guy that's given Usman Nurmagomedov any sort of trouble in the PFL. And, right now there's nobody other contender that's even worthy to fight Usman Nurmagomedov. I think at this point, once Usman Nurmagomedov beats a guy like Paul Hughes, and now with Islam moving up to 170, I mean, we got to see Usman Nurmagomedov either in 2026 or 2027 moving up to the UFC, because he's accomplished everything at the PFL. And once he beats Paul Hughes for a second time, which I do think he does, just like you said, pretty much easily, there's not really anybody else for him to fight. He's going to have to fight someone that we really don't know about, or someone that he's just going to make easy work with again. But it's definitely an exciting fight. I mean, obviously, the Rebel will sell the Dagestan versus Irish, fight, just like they did in the first time. The whole Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov all over again. Obviously, these guys don't hate each other as much. Paul Hughes actually does have some respect for Usman and Khabib's company. So we don't get that much of animosity.
And another great point, Anthony, that I'm gonna allude to as well to even add your argument is that there's a chance that they may end up being training partners in the future if they aren't already. That's how much admiration they had for one another after that fight, which I thought was very, very, very humbling to see. What did you think?
Yeah, it just goes to show you that I guess Paul Hughes has much more respect and much more humility and is much more humble than a guy like Conor McGregor, who he's supposed to be the next Conor McGregor, and Usman's supposed to be the next lineage of the Khabib Nurmagomedov legacy. But yeah, this is the fight to make. Whether it's close or not, it's really the only fight that's out there for Usman. And once Usman wins this fight, I really don't know who else is out there for him.
Well, listen, and speaking of Khabib, Conor, and the whole 9 yards, Khabib was asked about Conor during the speaking engagement, and he was very, 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 very open and very, very humble about Conor just as a whole. He was asked about his current legal troubles and just the downfall of his career, and he basically said in so many words that he hopes McGregor changes for the better and that he really has no ill will towards him, and that he just wishes him as much success as possible, which I think is very cool. Given from coming from an old rival, coming from a guy who was, I think, emotionally scarred from a lot of the things that Conor said 7 years ago, leading up to their fight at UFC 229, and for cooler heads to prevail, at least from the Khabib side of things, I think is really, really classy, and I don't think he could have handled it any better than he did. And who knows, maybe the story ends with Khabib coming back to Conor and Khabib being the one, and it actually helps him out to kind of show the world that as it takes two to tango, and it sometimes takes two friends who really need each other to help each other out. And who knows, man? Maybe potentially could be that guy in a very remorseful and heartwarming way. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, talking about a 360, I mean, you're talking about a guy like you said in Khabib who was so emotionally scarred from the things that Conor McGregor said and put him through emotionally and mentally. And, for him to be the guy who, had these guys met on the street or had there been no referee in the octagon, he pretty much would have killed, Conor McGregor. He would have snapped his neck and that face crank, he wouldn't have stopped. The referee basically had to pull his hands off him. And then even after the fight, Khabib still wanted to keep going. He wanted to attack the other guys, a part of McGregor's entourage, to now a couple of years later, saying, he has no ill will. He wishes the best. He hoped McGregor, could be a better person and change. And it goes to show how much of a great person he is, how humble he is, and how his religion means more than anything. And he knows in his religion, it's about forgiveness and it's about moving on, and like he said, Allah will, fix everything and anybody can change. And he just hopes for the best for Conor McGregor. And, Conor McGregor on the other side, anytime they bring up Khabib, whether Khabib's doing something good or not, McGregor always, shits on him and always tries to bring him down. And I guess it's a lot easier when you're the guy who beat up the dude for you to be humble than the guy who got, his ass kicked. But it goes to show you the difference in mentality between one guy and the difference between him and McGregor. Hopefully McGregor could find peace because that's the only way he will get over. I know McGregor is even emotionally scarred from that. He's never been the same mentally after that loss. And it just goes to show you how far and how down bad McGregor is. And I really don't see McGregor ever changing. I don't think he'll ever respect Khabib the way that Khabib respects him. I just think that's the type of guy McGregor is. And I think he's always going to have that ill will towards him. And I do hope McGregor gets better because I think, a healthy McGregor who's humble, maybe we can see a nice side of McGregor that we have never seen before. But ultimately, saying I don't think we'll ever see it. And that's why Khabib is always going to be the better man than McGregor.
Yeah, I don't think I just said it any better myself, and that's a perfect segue to the end of the show. We have UFC Vegas 109 taking place this Saturday. It's the second consecutive event from the Apex. The main event is a huge middleweight fight. It's another layer of this middleweight contender spree. First, we had RDR and Whitaker, and of course, we have this fight, and of course, after that, we have Hamzat and Rodriguez next week. But continuing on, Dolidze and just 5 rounds. And it's one of those fights where if you haven't been fully paying attention to the landscape of the division, this is a fight that may have snuck up on you. So let's get the particulars out of the way. 4:30 p.m. Eastern for the prelims. The entire card is on ESPN Plus. And let's take a look at the main eventers. Roman Dolidze, Anthony Hernandez. Dolidze 15-3, Hernandez 14-2. And Tapology loves Anthony Hernandez to get the job done. Right now, at the time that we're recording this, Hernandez 89%, Dolidze only 11%. And let's take a look at the trajectory of these two. So let's start with Dolidze out of Georgia. He's won 3 out of his last 5. As I just alluded to, let's take a look at some of his recent fights. He's getting up there in age, but again, as I alluded to, 3 in a row, all notable wins against 2 former title challengers in this span here. Marvin Vettori, that was back in March, in a very, very impressive unanimous decision win where his striking was on point in that fight. And of course, you had Kevin Holland, and that ended very, very unfortunately. That was back in October. And of course, he beat it on his way on Anthony Smith, which halted a 2-fight losing streak. And before that, you have to go all the way back to 2022, Anthony, to find a legitimate finish from Dolidze. That was a TKO win for against Jack Hermanson. and then 2 fights before that were also TKO wins, respectively, against Phil Hawes and Kyle Dawkins. So Dolidze is in a little bit of a weird run, although he is starting to get bigger name fights, so that's a huge positive for him to make his record potentially better than it actually is. And then taking a look at Anthony Hernandez, he's one of the most exciting contenders in this division as well, and can win in a variety of ways. 21% of his wins are by KO TKO, 58% of his wins are by submission. Hernandez now 8-2 in the UFC and is a winner of 6 straight, including very, very dominant wins against Brendan Allen and Michelle Pereira in his last 2 fights. And before that, submitting Roman Kopylov, and of course Roman Kopylov just fought fairly recently as well. So it's been an interesting run for both guys. But what do you think of Tapology's early projection on Hernandez being a sizable popular pick, if you will, going into this fight? Considering that both of these guys have very, very similar trajectories, and possibly the loser of this fight will have to potentially work all the way back up. And from following the UFC for a long time, if a guy loses a contender fight in a big spot, it usually takes about 2 to 3 years to get back to the place that they currently are now. Do you think that this is a crossroads fight in the middleweight division, and how do you see this fight playing out? Because I think if Hernandez gets this thing to the floor, I think it gets very interesting, and I think if this fight stays standing, it's anybody's fight. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think Hernandez should be the favorite, but I do think it's close. I don't think it should be, heavily one-sided one way or another. I think it should be a brawl. Hernandez, a rising contender on a 7-fight win streak. I do believe he's about 2 or 3 more wins away from fighting for a championship bout. If he wins this fight, he probably challenges a top 5 guy, and then if he wins that fight after that, he's looking at a potential title fight or a number 1 contenders match. And then you look at a guy like Dolidze, who is a little on the older side. He's the older fighter, but he's on a 3-fight win streak. He seems to be the best he's ever been. He'll be the bigger fighter. I think Dolidze will have the slight advantage in the striking department, and then Hernandez will have the advantage in the grappling department. Hernandez, I think, being the younger fighter, I also think he'll have the better gas tank. So I can see Dolidze winning this fight in the first 2 rounds on the feet. And then I think because of Hernandez having the better cardio and the better gas tank, I think he's going to grind out the next 3 rounds, winning rounds 3, 4, and 5 due to his grappling edge, which I think will negate some of that striking edge towards the end. So I think Hernandez wins this fight by decision by winning these last couple of rounds and having the better gas tank. What about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna go opposite from you, and I actually think Hernandez continues his momentum. I think he's fighting at a different level. I think his last couple of names have been solid wins, and again, you just don't really know how to read Dolidze, considering that his last few fights have been really strange. And I think Hernandez's 14-2 record is nothing to sweat at. And these guys probably know that if for whatever reason Khaybulaev it's injured, that maybe one of these two can slide into the backup slot for Chicago. So I think there's potentially a writing on this, because probably the winner of this is more than likely going to get flown out and sat in the front row, considering that the middleweight division has been juggling so many musical chairs that the UFC probably doesn't even know what contender it'll go with. And this is going off the assumption that maybe something happens to RDR. But either way, I think this fight is a chance to be a good one. And I think it's one of those middleweight fights where you don't want to sleep on it, because if you do, it might be one of the more exciting fights of the summer, even though it is taking place in a warehouse where not a ton of people are going to be able to see it. Unfortunately, I do think this fight could have been added to Chicago to make it a little bit more of a stacked card, but nonetheless, it's the main event of an Apex fight night, and we live with it and we move on. But I think it's one of those fights again where it's a crossroads fight where whoever wins is gonna and stay in that upper echelon, and whoever loses is more than likely gonna have a ton of work to do, even if the fight's close. So I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say Hernandez wins, but I'm also gonna go a step further and say don't expect a rematch out of these two, because I simply don't think it's gonna happen. So
we both got Hernandez. I got Hernandez by decision. You have Hernandez winning this by finish?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, cool. That'd be exciting. I can see that. It's by submission.
I have I have Hernandez by second round submission, more specifically, arm triangle. Yeah.
I can see that. That's a good pick.
Yep. And I'm looking over to the co-main event. This fight was kind of thrown together a little bit last minute. We have Steve Erceg taking on Osbourne. Obviously, this was sort of a fight that was put together within the last 10 days. I think it's too big of a step up in competition for Osbourne. I think it's a very, very similar situation to kind of what we were discussing with the Peter Yan Marcus McGee fight, and I think it goes very, very similarly where Steve Erceg easily wins a decision. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't see this one being very close. Like you said, this wasn't the fight we were supposed to get. We were supposed to get Steve Erceg against Song Park, which would have been a much closer fight. I don't see this fight being close. Both fighters haven't really won much of late. Both guys have have lost more than they won of late. But Erceg's losses have been to guys who are highly ranked, more skilled fighters than the guys that Osbourne has lost to. I think Erceg is the better fighter on the ground, and I think both these guys could strike. I think the striking is 50-50. And I think because Erceg is almost as good as a striker as him, but also being the much better grappler, I think his overall skill set will be the difference. So I think Steve Erceg is going to win this pretty easily by decision.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that's a very, very solid pick. Are there any other fights that interest you at all that jump off the card?
Yeah, I'm interested to see Chris Rodriguez against Andre Fili. Two guys who are skilled guys who have lost 2 or 3. I'm interested to see how both those guys respond, particularly Christian Rodriguez, who at one point looked like he had a tremendous trajectory, having a lot of impressive wins. I like him at the bantamweight 135 division. I think that's the better division for him than featherweight. So I'm interested to see how he responds. And I also am interested to see the rising star in Gene Massimento. I know he did get the split decision loss to Rob Font, but he's got tremendous potential as well. And I'm interested to see how he responds to a veteran like Miles John. So that's what I'm interested to see. How about you?
Yeah, those are some solid fights. I'm interested in the light heavyweight fight between Walker and Cerqueira. I think that is a chance to be an exciting one. And then would see some other fights that are interesting. Elijah Smith, who's a rising prospect. Jocelyn Edwards returns. I'm a little bit skeptical of this Angela Hill fighting Lucindo, and I actually think that this should have arguably been the co-main event, considering that the Steve Erceg Osbourne fight is technically a fight between that isn't a versus ranked one. So I found that placement of that fight kind of strange. And then I guess the Medicare Bina might be decent, and then Fernandez Stolyarenko, assuming the fight goes the way I think it's going to go, I think that fight potentially screams decision. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think all those fights should deliver. And yeah, I think this is going to be a card like last week where a lot of people heading in are going to be seeing a lot of names that they really don't recognize. But I think this is going to be a card that's definitely going to over deliver and be a card that surprises us with some of these fights that are going to be, kind of under the radar.
Well, and I think that's a great place to wrap it. So that's going to do it. This has been episode 123 of the MMA Outsiders. He's Anthony Balester. I'm Zain Bando. We'll be back to recap UFC Vegas, and of course preview UFC 319 and so much more. But until then, we hope you enjoy the fights this upcoming weekend. We hope you enjoy any roaming combat sports news that happens to occur within the next 48 to 72 hours. Regardless, we'll have you guys covered. So until then, have a great rest of your week. And just as a quick reminder as well, to please be sure to listen to the MMA Outsiders wherever you get your podcast, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so much more. The audio feed goes up right away a few hours before the video feed. So if you want the audio feed directly to your podcast RSS feed, you can click that with the click of a button. It would be very much appreciated if you supported the show over there, and of course, even 5-star review. And if you guys have any feedback on the show, or if you guys want us to see us pursue more guests, or just continue forward with just different kinds of segments, please let us know as the show continues to grow and evolve. But for now, that's going to wrap it. But before we wrap it, though, Anthony, any final thoughts or words of wisdom as we go into the first full weekend in August here in the world of combat sports?
Yeah, I just say get your popcorn ready because we got a lot of exciting fights, and it's going to be a tremendous weekend of UFC. And then next week it's going to be huge. So when we preview the biggest fight of the year with Hamzat against Dricus du Plessis, so definitely make sure to stay tuned because the show is only getting better each and every week.
100%. That's going to do it. Thanks again for tuning in. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll talk to you guys on the other side as we've officially begun the month of August. Thanks, everyone.